Well, Christmas and New Year were good, but it feels good to be back.
Anthology movies are a rare delight in cinema, and A Trilogy of Terror I find is one of the better examples of the genre. It's made all the more impressive when you realise it's a made-for-TV movie.
The legendary Karen Black plays not just one, but 4 distinct roles across 3 segments in the film, and as usual, she's absolutely phenomenal. It's one of those performances where you don't see the actress. She plays the whole gamut of human emotions to a T.
My personal favourite is her dual roles in the second segment, where she has to play twin sisters with opposing personalities.
The opening chapter is a slow-building date-rape revenge tale. A teacher and a student who's obsessed with her end up going on a date, and if that wasn't creepy enough, the dude then hits her with a Rohypnol cocktail. What then follows is a balance of power act with the 2 sides throwing threats at each other. It gets pretty heated as we don't know who'll win, and it has some great twists to spice things up.
Why do you think you suddenly had the overwhelming desire to see what I looked like under all those clothes?
In the middle segment, we're treated to a rock-solid horror character study involving rival sisters. One is a free-loving seductress blonde bimbo, while the other is a prudish and cold brunette. We join them as they're visited by a doctor who's caught between their arguments. It's a good wee tale, nothing spectacular, but Karen Black is awesome in the dual roles, and her performances are what keep you invested here.
Answer me, you creep!
But I wouldn't answer her, nor would I allow her to enter. I remained locked in my room, silent, while she raged and swore at me.
However, the real reason this has garnered such a cult following is the final story, Amelia.
In what is essentially a one-woman show, we follow Amelia after a shopping spree that includes picking up a fetish doll in the style of a Zuni Aboriginal warrior. It just so happens to contain the soul of He Who Kills, with only a golden chain stopping the soul from emerging. Of course, said chain removes itself, and what follows is 10 minutes of sheer panic as the doll attempts to stab her to death with a tiny knife, wisely cutting her feet first to even the odds. Every time Amelia catches a break, the doll re-emerges to attack her, and the tension level is constantly high throughout. It's probably the freakiest doll I've ever seen, even worse than something from, say, Puppet Master, and it makes these horribly pained breathing noises the whole time. Is it silly? Absolutely, but it manages to sell you it in the right way. It's anxiety-driven, at times funny, and completely memorable in the best ways.
I find Trilogy of Terror is a made-for-TV movie that manages to surpass the stigma that usually accompanies such productions.
21 years after release, there was a sequel, Trilogy of Terror 2, released in 1996. Here, it's Liza Anthony who takes up the mantle of playing numerous roles across the segments.
For a long time, I heard this was just a bland rehash of the first anthology, but aside from the Zuni doll returning, it's all new stories.
What has he done?
What's he done? He's done you, my dear. That's what he's done.
Oh, please, Roger, it's just not true.
Here. Enjoy the movie.
The first segment involves the wife of a wealthy man who's having an affair with her cousin. He then begins threatening her into ending the relationship. The wealthy man is incredibly entertaining. He has such a great voice and is able to deliver his lines in the most slimy way possible, no matter how ridiculous.
Watching you attempt to cool off those hot little panties of yours. Bye-bye.
They decide to kill him, and then the film descends into a completely other level when they have to dig up his body and discover giant flesh-eating rats. Yeah, giant flesh-eating rats, it comes from nowhere. This is the only short that's not an original story. It's actually based on the 1936 tale The Graveyard Rats by Henry Kuttner. It's a decent opener, but the issues with the film are clear to you straight away.
The air is shaken, the sea turned black, fire is quenched, the earth shudders, and all the hosts of things of hell do tremble and are confounded.
The second story involves a mother that performs a ritual that raises her son from the dead. The ritual works, but of course everything isn't as hunky-dory as first suggested, and it becomes a deadly chase. Yeah, not the most imaginative thing. It doesn't do anything new or exciting with that pretty basic premise.
It's a simple premise that's too thin to hold up the entire 30 minutes, and it's easily the weakest segment across the two films for me.
The third is a direct sequel to the Amelia segment from the previous film. Yeah, that's right, the Zuni doll is back, but it's a terrible rehash of the superior first entry. Here, a crime lab technician is investigating the evidence from the previous murders of Amelia and her mother, and of course comes across the Zuni doll. It focuses more on explaining the Zuni doll to us, and man, it is painfully slow. The first entry was a lot more subtle with its storytelling, and had Karen Black's performance in family drama to empathise with her character. Here, it's so clinical. I just want to see the thing run around and do something. Also, this time it's set in a museum with massive wide open spaces. It looks nicer, but the fear is lost because the doll is tiny. What made the first so intense was the fact it was Amelia's tiny apartment and she has limited space to flee and only one exit. Here, there's so much open space to run from this thing. And it's a museum, I'm sure there's like a million fire exits. The doll is still a riot though, and his screaming brought a giggle every time.
It all has a super cheesy, cheap feeling across the whole thing, and there's long stretches of pretty boring plot exposition or just waiting around for something to happen.
The first film was barely 70 minutes, whereas here it's 90, and you feel all that extra 20 minutes stretched across the movie. There's also just a real lack of atmosphere. I mostly watched it with a bored, uncaring mood rather than getting sucked into the experience. Trilogy of Terror 2 isn't as bad as people may remember it to be, but at the end of the day, the issue is clear. The stories just aren't as strong as the first film. They're small concepts that have been dragged out to 30 minutes each, whereas the first movie beefed up each segment with a ton of character and never let things outstay their welcome.
However, I'd love to see a third Trilogy of Terror be made, even if just to say this is a trilogy of trilogies.